What could a single $20 bill really mean when your own father is laughing at you at the lawyer's table? How did my grandfather's quiet final gift, just a bill with a circled serial number, end up freezing a bank manager and turning the tables on every smug insult I'd ever heard? This is how I showed everyone that respect doesn't always come in the form they expect, and why in the end, the joke was on them. The Landry family living room had never felt smaller than it did that Tuesday afternoon, packed with relatives who'd driven in from 3 counties away for Grandpa Howard's will reading. I sat in the corner chair, the same spot I'd occupied during every family gathering for the past 29 years, while my father Walter held court from his usual position by the fireplace, already counting money that wasn't his yet. "Come on, Tracy, let's get this show on the road," Walter boomed at the lawyer, his voice carrying that particular blend of impatience and entitlement that had defined every conversation I'd ever heard him have. We all know the old man was sitting on a pile of cash. Time to divvy it up. Tracy Winters, Grandpa's longtime legal advisor, adjusted her glasses with the patience of someone who'd dealt with Walter's bluster before. She was a composed woman in her late 40s, the kind of professional who chose her words carefully and never let emotion creep into her voice. "Mr. Landry, your father was very specific about how he wanted this handled. If you'll allow me to proceed." "Specific about what?" Walter interrupted, his face already flushing red. "About how he was going to keep being a cheapskate even from the grave. The man drove a 15-year-old Honda and lived in that shoebox apartment. Where's all the money he should have been spending on his family?" My mother Linda shifted uncomfortably on the couch, casting nervous glances between Walter and the lawyer. She'd perfected the art of silent disapproval over their 30-year marriage, but she'd never once challenged Walter when it mattered. My younger brother Derek snickered from his spot by the window, already anticipating whatever show our father was about to put on. "Your father left specific bequests," Tracy continued, opening a manila folder with deliberate calm. "To Walter Landry, his son, he leaves his personal effects, his furniture, and his 2008 Honda Civic." The silence that followed was deafening. Walter's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That's it? Personal effects? Where's the bank account? Where are the investments? The man worked as an accountant for 40 years. "To Ethan Landry, his grandson," Tracy continued, ignoring Walter's outburst. "He leaves the contents of this envelope." She handed me a simple white envelope, sealed and surprisingly light. Every eye in the room was on me as I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single $20 bill, crisp and new, with the serial number circled in red ink, HB472918556C. The laughter started with Derek, a sharp bark that cut through the tension like a knife. Then Walter joined in, his face shifting from confusion to cruel amusement in the span of a heartbeat. $20? Walter wheezed between laughs. 20 ridiculous dollars? That's what the old man thought you were worth, Ethan. 20 measly bucks. The other relatives, Uncle Ray, Aunt Patricia, various cousins I barely knew, began murmuring among themselves. I caught fragments of their conversations. Always was a strange old man. Probably lost his mind at the end. Poor Ethan. "This is ridiculous," Walter declared, turning back to Tracy. "There has to be more. Bank accounts, investments, something. You can't tell me a man who worked his whole life and lived like a monk only left behind a beat-up car and $20. Tracy's expression remained neutral. "This is the entirety of Howard Landry's will. If you have questions about other assets, you're welcome to investigate, but these are his only bequests." My fiancée Susan, who'd been sitting quietly beside me, reached over and squeezed my hand. She was one of the few people in that room who truly knew my grandfather, who understood that Howard Landry never did anything without a reason. Her small gesture of support was the only thing keeping me from walking out. "Investigate?" Walter's voice rose to a near shout. "Oh, I'll investigate all right. There's money somewhere, and when I find it, we'll see about this joke of a will." The scene at Maplewood Cemetery an hour later was even worse. As we stood around Grandpa Howard's freshly covered grave, Walter couldn't resist sharing his opinion of the inheritance with anyone who'd listen. $20, he announced to Mrs. Henderson from next door, loud enough for half the mourners to hear. 40 years of penny pinching, and he leaves his grandson $20. I always knew the old man had lost it, but this proves it. I stood at the edge of the burial site, staring at the temporary marker that bore my grandfather's name, birth date, and the date he'd passed away 3 days earlier. Howard Landry, beloved father and grandfather. The words felt inadequate for a man who'd taught me more about patience and precision in our occasional conversations than Walter had managed in 29 years of being my father. "You know what this means, don't you?" Walter continued, now addressing Derek and a few cousins. "The old fool probably spent everything on God knows what. Medical bills maybe, or gave it all to some charity. Left his own family with nothing but a car that's not worth the gas in the tank. Susan stepped closer to me, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't listen to him, Ethan. Your grandfather loved you. This bill, there's something about it. The way he circled that serial number, it means something. I wanted to believe her, but standing there in the cold October air, surrounded by the laughter and whispered jokes of relatives who'd never bothered to visit Howard while he was alive, it was hard to see past the humiliation. $20. In a room full of people who'd expected thousands, maybe tens of thousands, I'd inherited the price of a cheap dinner. But as we walked back to the cars, I found myself thinking about something Grandpa had said the last time we talked, just a few weeks before he passed away. We'd been sitting in his small apartment, and he'd been showing me his old accounting ledgers, pages and pages of meticulous numbers, every entry perfectly aligned. And numbers tell stories, Ethan, he'd said in that quiet, careful way of his. But only if you know how to read them. Most people see figures on a page. An accountant sees the truth behind the figures. I pulled the $20 bill from my pocket and looked at it again. The serial number was circled in red ink, just as Tracy had handed it to me. HB472918556C. Howard had been an accountant for 4 decades. He'd spent his entire career making sure every number was in its proper place, every calculation double-checked and verified. Nothing was accidental. Back at my apartment that evening, Susan and I sat at my small kitchen table, the $20 bill spread out between us like evidence in a crime scene. The laughter from the living room and the cemetery still echoed in my ears, but Susan's conviction was starting to infect me with something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Look at how precise this circle is, she said, pointing to the red ink around the serial number. This wasn't done quickly or carelessly. He took time with this. Susan worked in small business banking, and she had an eye for details that most people missed. She understood numbers the way my grandfather had, saw patterns where others saw chaos. But what could it mean? I asked, though even as I said it, I was remembering more of Grandpa's odd comments over the years. References to keys that don't look like keys, and doors that only open for the right person. I don't know yet, Susan admitted. But I know your grandfather didn't leave you $20 as an insult. Walter can laugh all he wants, but Howard Landry was the most deliberate person I ever met. This number means something. As I stared at those circled digits, HB472918556C, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what my grandfather really left me, even if it made me look like a fool. Even if Walter's laughter followed me to every bank, every lawyer's office, every obstacle I might run into, because Howard Landry had been an accountant and nothing was accidental. The next morning, I called in sick to my job at Meridian Logistics and drove to Walter's used car dealership. I hadn't planned to confront him. I just needed to understand why he was so certain Grandpa had been hiding money. But as I pulled into the lot, I could hear his voice booming from the back office, regaling someone with yesterday's events. $20, can you believe it? 40 years of living like a hermit, and that's what he leaves behind. I always told Linda the old man was losing his marbles. I pushed through the office door to find Walter behind his desk, feet up, talking to my brother Derek and 2 of his salesmen. The conversation stopped the moment they saw me. Well, Walter grinned. If it isn't the $20 millionaire. Come to show off your fortune, Ethan? I came to ask you something, I said, ignoring the snickers from Derek and the salesman. Why were you so sure Grandpa had money? What made you think there was more than what Tracy read in the will? Walter's expression shifted from amusement to something harder. Because I'm not clueless, unlike some people. You think a man works for 40 years, lives frugally, drives an old car, and puts his money where? He had to be saving it somewhere. But you don't know for sure. I know enough, Walter said, leaning forward. And I know that when I find it, and I will find it, that joke of a will won't hold up in court. $20. He laughed again, sharper this time. You keep hanging on to that bill, son. Frame it, put it on your wall. It's all you're ever going to get from the old man. Derek chimed in from his spot by the filing cabinet. Maybe you can use it to buy yourself some self-respect, Ethan. God knows you need it. I left without another word, but as I drove away, I found myself thinking about the summers I'd spent with Grandpa Howard when I was younger. Walter had always been too busy with the dealership to pay much attention to me, so I'd ended up at Grandpa's apartment for weeks at a time. Those had been some of the best days of my childhood. Howard had been a patient teacher, showing me how to balance checkbooks, how to read financial statements, how to spot the patterns that most people missed. He'd had a way of making numbers come alive, turning abstract concepts into stories about the people behind the figures. Every number has a purpose, Ethan, he'd told me once when I was maybe 12 years old. In accounting, there's no such thing as a random digit. Everything means something, even if it's not obvious at first glance. He'd also told me stories about his work, about clients who'd hidden assets in creative ways, about codes and systems that looked like nothing to outsiders but revealed their secrets to those who knew what to look for. At the time, I'd thought they were just stories. Now I wondered if they'd been lessons. That evening, Susan and I met at Sally's Diner, a small place downtown where we could talk without being overheard. She'd been thinking about the bill all day, she told me, and she'd come to a conclusion that both excited and terrified me. "I think we need to search your grandfather's apartment," she said over coffee and pie. "If this serial number is some kind of code, there might be other clues there. Documents, records, something that explains what he was trying to tell you." "The landlord's already cleaning it out," I said. Walter made sure of that. He wanted to get in there and look for hidden money before anyone else could. "Did he find anything?" "Nothing. He spent 2 days going through every drawer, every closet, every box. Came out empty-handed and madder than I've ever seen him." Susan stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Maybe he was looking for the wrong things. Your grandfather was subtle. If he hid something, it wouldn't be obvious." The next day, I convinced the landlord to let me take one final look through Grandpa's things before they went to the donation center. The apartment felt hollow without Howard's quiet presence, but his personality was still there in the details. Books arranged by subject and author, bills filed chronologically, everything in its proper place. I was going through his desk when I found it. A small notebook tucked behind a drawer that didn't quite fit flush with the others. The pages were filled with Howard's careful handwriting, dates, numbers, abbreviations that meant nothing to me. But on the last page with writing, I found something that made my heart race. "GCNB, C. Martin," it read, followed by a series of numbers that included the serial number from my $20 bill. Below that, in different ink, as if added later, "Serial only, E will understand. GCNB, Grant County National Bank, where Howard had done his personal banking for over 20 years. And Martin, that had to be Martin Givens, the bank manager who'd handled Grandpa's accounts. I called Susan immediately. "I found something. We need to go to the bank." "What did you find?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think Grandpa left me more than $20. I think he left me a puzzle." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man who'd raised me more than my own father ever had. Howard Landry had been quiet, methodical, and careful with his words. But he'd also been kind in ways that Walter had never understood. While Walter had seen Howard's frugality as stinginess, I'd learned to recognize it as intentionality. Every dollar Howard spent had a purpose, which meant every dollar he saved had a purpose too. The $20 bill sat on my nightstand, that circled serial number catching the light from the street lamp outside my window. HB472918556C. Numbers that told a story, if only I knew how to read it. Tomorrow, I would go to Grant County National Bank and find out what story my grandfather had been trying to tell me. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally understand why Howard Landry never did anything by accident. Grant County National Bank occupied a corner building in downtown Millbrook, its red brick facade and tall windows giving it the solid, dependable appearance that had attracted customers like my grandfather for decades. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors that Friday morning, I felt like I was stepping across a threshold into unknown territory. The lobby was busy with the usual Friday banking crowd, people depositing paychecks, elderly customers conducting transactions they could have done online, small business owners making their weekly runs. I approached the teller window with the $20 bill in my hand, suddenly aware of how foolish I might be about to look. "I need to speak with Martin Givens," I told the young woman behind the counter. "It's about my grandfather's account, Howard Landry." The teller, whose nameplate read Jules, looked at me with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Givens is in meetings this morning. Is there something I can help you with?" I hesitated. "How do you explain that you think a $20 bill might be the key to something larger without sounding completely insane?" "It's complicated. Could you tell him it's about a serial number? Howard Landry's grandson? About a serial number?" Jules's expression didn't change, but I noticed a young woman at the desk behind her look up sharply. She was maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair pulled back in a professional ponytail and the kind of alert intelligence that reminded me of Susan. Her desk nameplate read, "Carolyn Givens, banking intern." "Excuse me," Carolyn said, standing and walking over to the teller window. "Did you say Howard Landry? And something about a serial number?" "Yes. I'm his grandson, Ethan. I have this—" I pulled out the $20 bill, showing her the circled serial number. Carolyn's eyes widened slightly. "Jules, could you please ask my father to come out when he has a moment? Tell him it's about Mr. Landry's grandson and the special arrangement." Special arrangement. Those two words sent a jolt of electricity through me. There had been a special arrangement. Martin Givens emerged from his office 5 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s with graying hair and the careful demeanor of someone who'd spent his career handling other people's financial secrets. He looked at me with curious recognition. "You're Howard's grandson," he said. It wasn't a question. "You have his eyes, and his way of standing, like you're thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Mr. Givens, I'm not sure what my grandfather set up, but I found this in his effects." I showed him the $20 bill pointing to the circled serial number. There was a note in his apartment that mentioned your name and this number. Martin took the bill, examining it carefully. His expression changed as he read the serial number, a subtle shift from professional courtesy to something more intense. "HB472-18556C, he murmured, more to himself than to me. "After all these years." "You recognize it?" Martin looked around the busy lobby, then back at me. "Mr. Landry, Ethan, this isn't a conversation for the lobby. Could you come to my office and bring some identification? Your grandfather was very specific about the verification process." As we walked through the bank toward Martin's office, I caught Carolyn watching us with intense curiosity. She was her father's daughter, I realized, someone who noticed details and remembered them. Martin's office was a study in organized efficiency, much like my grandfather's apartment had been. Financial charts on the walls, a desk clear of everything except what was immediately necessary, and a sense that every item in the room had earned its place through careful consideration. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," Martin said as he closed the door behind us. "In 30 years of banking, I've never met anyone quite like him. He understood money in ways that most people never will." "What kind of special arrangement did he make?" Martin sat behind his desk, still holding my $20 bill. 3 years ago, Howard came to me with a very unusual request. He wanted to set up what he called a numerical key system. He said he had a grandson who understood numbers the way he did, and when the time came, that grandson would know what to do with the key. My heart was pounding. "The serial number is the key?" "Part of it. Howard was very specific about the verification process. He said that anyone could come in here with a $20 bill, but only the right person would know to look for the serial number. Only the right person would think to circle it, and only the right person would connect it to his name and this bank." I thought about the red ink around the serial number, about the deliberate way it had been marked. He circled it himself, didn't he? Before he put it in the envelope. "Howard Landry never did anything by accident," Martin said, echoing the words that had been running through my mind for days. "He told me that if someone ever came in here with this specific serial number, and if they could prove they were his grandson, I should give them access to something he'd prepared." "What kind of something?" Martin stood up, walking to a filing cabinet in the corner of his office. "A safe deposit box. But not just any safe deposit box. One that can only be opened with a very specific combination, a combination that your grandfather said you would be able to figure out." He pulled out a file folder, thick with documents. Howard spent months setting this up. Legal paperwork, verification procedures, backup systems in case something went wrong. He wanted to make sure that when the time came, everything would be handled properly. "What's in the box?" "I don't know. Howard never told me, and I never asked. But I can tell you this. He paid the rental fees 5 years in advance, and he made it clear that whatever was in there was meant for you specifically." Martin returned to his desk, opening the file folder. "There's one more thing, Ethan. Yesterday, after your grandfather's funeral, your father came in here asking questions. He wanted to know about Howard's accounts, his financial history, whether there were any assets that hadn't been disclosed in the will." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Banking privacy laws are very clear, and Walter isn't listed on any of Howard's accounts. But he was persistent. He made it clear that he intends to find whatever money he believes his father was hiding. And now I'm here with a $20 bill and a story about serial numbers." Martin smiled for the first time since I'd entered his office. "Now you're here with exactly what your grandfather said you'd bring. The question is, are you ready to find out what he left for you?" I looked at the $20 bill in Martin's hands, thinking about Walter's laughter, about the humiliation in the lawyer's office, about all the years of being dismissed and underestimated. My grandfather had seen something in me that my own father had missed. He'd trusted me with a puzzle that only I could solve. "I'm ready," I said. Martin made a note in his file. "Good, but we'll need to do this properly. Howard's instructions require a formal appointment, proper documentation, and at least one witness from the bank staff. Can you come back Monday morning? Say 10 o'clock? "Of course." As I left Martin's office, I passed Carolyn's desk again. She looked up from her computer, giving me a small, encouraging smile. Mr. Landry? She called softly. My father doesn't usually get excited about banking procedures, but when he saw that serial number, I haven't seen him react like that in years. What do you think it means? I think your grandfather was a very smart man who knew exactly what he was doing, and I think Monday morning is going to be very interesting. That evening, I sat in my apartment with Susan, telling her everything that had happened at the bank. She listened with growing excitement, asking questions about Martin's reactions, about the safe deposit box, about what my grandfather might have left behind. "This is it, Ethan," she said finally. "This is what he wanted you to find. All those stories he used to tell about numbers and keys and hidden meanings, he was preparing you for this moment." I wanted to share her excitement, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Walter was going to find out about Monday's appointment. He'd been asking questions at the bank, making threats about legal action, making it clear that he wouldn't give up easily. "What if there's nothing in the box?" I asked. "What if this is all just an elaborate way of saying goodbye?" Susan took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Then we'll know your grandfather loved you enough to create a mystery just for you. But I don't think that's what this is. I think Howard Landry spent 3 years setting up something that's going to change your life." As I fell asleep that night, I found myself thinking about all the conversations I'd had with my grandfather over the years. The patient lessons about numbers and patterns, the stories about hidden assets and creative solutions, the quiet confidence he'd always shown in my abilities even when Walter was tearing me down. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. The weekend passed in a blur of nervous energy and careful preparation. Susan helped me gather every piece of identification I could find: driver's license, birth certificate, social security card, even my old college ID. We went through my grandfather's notebook page by page, looking for additional clues about what might be waiting in that safe deposit box. "Look at this," Susan said Saturday evening, pointing to a series of numbers Howard had written in the margin of one page. "These dates, they're all from the last 3 years, right around the time Martin said your grandfather set up the arrangement." The dates were accompanied by dollar amounts, but not in any pattern I could immediately recognize. Some entries were for a few $100s, others for several thousand. It looked like a record of transactions, but I couldn't figure out what kind. "Investment records, maybe?" I suggested. Grandpa always said the stock market was just accounting on a larger scale. "Or deposits," Susan said. Maybe he was moving money around, consolidating accounts, preparing for whatever he put in that box. Sunday afternoon brought an unwelcome interruption. I was reviewing Howard's notebook one more time when my phone rang. Walter's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. But something told me I needed to know what he was thinking. "Ethan," Walter's voice was tight with frustration, "I want to know what you were doing at Grandpa's bank on Friday." A sudden chill washed over me. "How did you—" "I have friends all over this town, son. Friends who keep their eyes open. You were seen talking to Martin Givens, and I want to know why." I thought quickly. Walter couldn't know about the safe deposit box. Martin had been clear about banking privacy laws, but he obviously suspected something. "I was asking about Grandpa's checking account," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought maybe there was money left that wasn't mentioned in the will." "And?" "Nothing. The account was closed after he passed away, just like Tracy said. There's no hidden money, Dad. Just the car and the $20. There was a long pause. When Walter spoke again, his voice carried a warning. "I'm going to find out what the old man was hiding, Ethan. And when I do, we're going to have a conversation about family loyalty and who deserves what. Don't get any ideas about playing detective." The call ended. I stared at my phone, realizing that Walter's suspicions were more dangerous than I'd thought. He wasn't going to give up, and he wasn't going to let me pursue this quietly. "He knows something's up," I told Susan. "He's watching me." "Then we need to be careful, but we can't stop now, not when we're this close to finding out what your grandfather left you." That night, I called Tracy Winters at home. I'd found her personal number in Howard's notebook, and I hoped she might be able to provide some legal context for whatever was about to happen. "Ethan?" Tracy's voice was warm but cautious. "Is everything all right? I need to ask you about Grandpa's will, about the $20 bill. Did he ever mention why he left me that specific amount?" There was a pause. "Your grandfather was very deliberate about his final wishes. He spent considerable time making sure every detail was exactly as he wanted it. Did he mention a safe deposit box, or any arrangement with the bank?" Another pause, longer this time. "Ethan, I can't go into the details of client communications, even after a client has passed on. But I can tell you this. Howard Landry was one of the most thorough people I ever worked with. If he left you something, he made sure it was legally sound and properly documented. What if Walter tries to challenge it? What if he claims there were assets that should have been included in the will? Then he'll need to provide evidence of those assets, and he'll need to prove they weren't properly distributed according to Howard's wishes. That's a very high legal bar to meet. Tracy's words were reassuring, but I could hear something else in her voice, a carefulness that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October weather that makes everything feel ominous. I dressed carefully, my best suit, conservative tie, the kind of outfit that would make a good impression in a bank. Susan offered to drive me, but I needed to do this alone. Grant County National Bank looked different on Monday morning, more serious somehow. The weekend crowd was gone, replaced by the purposeful atmosphere of business banking. Martin Givens was waiting for me in the lobby, along with Carolyn and another bank employee I didn't recognize. "Ethan," Martin said, shaking my hand. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good. We'll be going down to the vault level. It's more private there, and it's where the safe deposit boxes are housed. I should warn you, your grandfather's instructions were very specific about the opening procedure. This might take some time." We took an elevator to the basement level, emerging into a hallway lined with security cameras and reinforced doors. The vault area was like something from a movie: thick concrete walls, multiple locks, an atmosphere of absolute security. "Box 47291-856, Martin said, leading us to a section of larger boxes near the back of the vault room. "Your grandfather chose the number himself, said it would be meaningful to the right person." I stared at the number on the box. 47291-856. The same sequence from the serial number on my $20 bill, minus the letters at the beginning and end. "He used part of the serial number as the box number," I said, understanding flooding through me. "That's right. And according to his instructions, the combination to open the box should be derivable from information you already have." Martin handed me a small slip of paper. "These are your grandfather's exact words. The key is in the date we first talked about numbers, plus the date I knew he understood them, minus the years between us." I read the note 3 times, my mind racing. The date we first talked about numbers. That would have been the first summer I spent with him, when I was 12, July 15th, 1998. The date he knew I understood them. That was harder. There had been so many conversations, so many lessons. Then I remembered. It was the summer I turned 16, August 22nd, 2002. I'd been helping him balance his checkbook, and I'd caught an error that he'd missed, a transposed digit in a deposit entry. He'd looked at me with surprise and something like pride and said, "Now you're thinking like an accountant." The years between us. Howard had been born in 1943. I'd been born in 1990. 47 years. I did the math in my head. 71598 plus 082202. 47, Warcam 153753. 153753, I said aloud. Martin nodded to Carolyn, who entered the combination into the electronic lock. There was a soft beep, and the lock disengaged. "Would you like to open it yourself?" Martin asked. My hands were shaking as I pulled open the heavy door. Inside was a single manila envelope, thick with documents, and a letter with my name written on it in Howard's careful handwriting. "Take your time," Martin said. "We'll give you some privacy." I opened the letter first. "My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then you've proven what I always knew, that you inherited more than just my eyes and my height. You inherited my mind for numbers and my patience for puzzles. Your father never understood that wealth isn't just about the money you can see. It's about the money you can grow, the investments you can nurture, the future you can build with careful planning and smart decisions. In this box, you'll find the documentation for accounts and investments I've been building for you over the past 20 years. Not millions, but enough to give you the independence your father never wanted you to have. Enough to show you that sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who win in the end. The serial number on that $20 bill? It's the account number for your primary investment account. I thought you'd appreciate the symmetry. Use this wisely, Ethan. Make me proud. Your grandfather, Howard Landry." I opened the manila envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were bank statements, investment records, and legal documents that made my head spin. Stock portfolios, bonds, a certificate of deposit that had been growing for 2 decades, and the deed to a small commercial property downtown that I'd driven past 1,000 times without knowing my grandfather owned it. The total value, according to the most recent statements, was just over $400,000. $400,000. I sat in the vault room staring at the papers, trying to process what my grandfather had done. While Walter had been complaining about Howard's frugality, while the family had been joking about his cheapness, he'd been quietly building a legacy for his grandson. "Mr. Landry?" Carolyn's voice was soft, respectful. "Is everything all right?" I looked up to find Martin, Carolyn, and the other bank employee watching me with expressions of professional curiosity mixed with genuine concern. "He did it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He actually did it." "The inheritance is what you expected?" Martin asked. "It's more than I ever dreamed of. But there's something else." I looked at the investment account number on one of the statements. HB 47291856C. The exact serial number from the $20 bill. "How is this possible? How did he get a bill with this specific serial number?" Martin smiled. "Your grandfather had connections at the Federal Reserve Bank in Richmond. He explained what he wanted to do, and they helped him acquire a bill with the matching serial number. It took them 6 months to find one, but Howard was patient." Patient. That was my grandfather, in a word. Patient enough to build an investment portfolio over 20 years. Patient enough to create an elaborate puzzle that would keep his legacy safe from Walter's grasping hands. Patient enough to trust that when the time came, I would be smart enough to solve it. "There's one more thing," Martin said. "According to the legal documents your grandfather left with us, you now have full control over these assets. But there's also a provision that if anyone contests your inheritance or tries to claim these assets belong to the estate, the entire amount gets donated to charity." I understood immediately. This was Howard's final protection against Walter's greed. If my father tried to take what wasn't his, he'd lose everything. "When do I need to make decisions about these accounts?" I asked. "No rush," Martin said. "Everything is set up to continue growing exactly as your grandfather intended. But when you're ready, we can discuss your options." I gathered up the documents, my hands still shaking slightly. In the space of an hour, I'd gone from being the family joke to being financially independent. But more than that, I'd learned that my grandfather had believed in me in ways that no one else ever had. As we rode the elevator back to the main floor, I thought about Walter's phone call, about his threats, and his certainty that he would find Howard's hidden assets. He was right about one thing. There had been hidden assets. He just hadn't been smart enough to find them. The next few days passed in a strange bubble of secrecy and anticipation. I went to work at Meridian Logistics as usual, processed shipping manifests and coordinated delivery schedules, made small talk with my coworkers about weekend plans and weather. But underneath the surface normalcy, everything had changed. I was carrying around the knowledge of my grandfather's gift like a secret that was almost too big to contain. $400,000 in carefully managed investments, plus a commercial property that was generating monthly rental income. I'd gone from living paycheck to paycheck to having more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible. But I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Martin Givens had been clear about the importance of discretion. "Your grandfather's provisions are ironclad," he'd explained during a follow-up meeting Tuesday afternoon. "But the less attention you draw to this inheritance, the better. Walter is already suspicious, and if he finds out about the assets before you're ready to deal with his reaction, things could get complicated." Susan was the only person who knew the full truth, and even she was struggling with the magnitude of what Howard had accomplished. 20 years, she said Wednesday evening as we sat in her apartment kitchen, reviewing the investment statements for the dozenth time. "He started putting money away for you when you were 9 years old, before you'd even shown any real interest in numbers or accounting." "He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself," I said. "Something that Walter never saw." "Your father's going to lose his mind when he finds out?" That was what worried me most. Walter's reaction when he discovered that the $20 inheritance he'd been mocking was actually the key to a fortune that dwarfed anything he'd ever earned from his used car dealership. I'd been thinking about how to handle the revelation, but I kept coming back to the same conclusion. There was no gentle way to deliver this news. Thursday brought an unwelcome reminder of Walter's persistence. I was at my desk at Meridian when my phone buzzed with a text message from my brother Derek. "Dad's been asking around about Grandpa's finances. He found something at the apartment. Family meeting tonight at his house. 7 p.m. Don't be late." My stomach dropped. What could Walter have found? Martin had assured me that all the legal documents were safely stored at the bank, and I'd been careful to remove Howard's notebook and any other potentially revealing papers from the apartment before the landlord cleaned it out. But Walter was nothing if not persistent when money was involved. I arrived at my parents' house that evening to find the living room full of relatives. The same crowd that had witnessed my humiliation at the will reading, plus a few additional faces I recognized from the funeral. Walter stood by the fireplace like a prosecutor preparing to deliver closing arguments, while Linda bustled around offering coffee and looking uncomfortable. "Good, you're here," Walter said when he saw me. "We need to talk about what I found in Dad's things." He held up a manila folder, thin but official looking. Bank statements. Old ones from about 5 years ago, and they show a lot more activity than what we saw in the will. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to remain calm. What kind of activity? Transfers. Large ones. Money moving out of his checking account into somewhere else. Thousands of dollars at a time, Ethan. Money that should have been part of the estate. Uncle Ray shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Walter, maybe this isn't something for the whole family." "The hell it isn't," Walter snapped. "Dad was hiding money, and I want to know where it went. I've got a lawyer looking into this, and if I find out there were assets that weren't disclosed in the will, I'm going to contest the whole thing." Derek nodded eagerly from his spot by the window. "It's fraud, right? Hiding assets from the estate?" "That depends," said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Tracy Winters entering the living room, still wearing her business suit and carrying her leather briefcase. On whether the assets were actually hidden or simply distributed according to the deceased's wishes. Walter's face flushed red. "Tracy, I didn't invite you to this little family gathering." "Linda called me," Tracy said calmly, setting her briefcase on the coffee table. "She was concerned about the legal implications of what you're suggesting, and frankly, so am I." "What legal implications?" Walter demanded. Tracy opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file folder. "The implications of making false accusations about estate fraud. The implications of harassing bank employees for information you're not entitled to. The implications of threatening to contest a will that was executed perfectly legally and according to your father's explicit wishes." The room fell silent. I could see Walter calculating, trying to figure out how much Tracy actually knew. "Howard Landry was my client for more than 15 years, Tracy continued. I handled his estate planning, his will, and several other legal matters. I can assure you that every asset he held at the time of his passing was properly accounted for and distributed exactly as he directed. But the bank transfers were his funds to manage as he saw fit. If Howard chose to give gifts, make investments, or establish trusts during his lifetime, that was entirely his prerogative. The will only governs assets that remained in his possession at the time he passed." Walter's confident expression began to falter. "Are you telling me there's nothing? No hidden accounts, no secret investments?" "I'm telling you that your father's will was carried out precisely as he intended, and I'm advising you, as a friend of the family, to be very cautious about making claims you can't substantiate." The meeting broke up shortly after that, with relatives drifting away in small groups and Walter retreating to his garage to sulk. But as I was leaving, Tracy caught my arm. "Walk me to my car," she said quietly. Once we were outside, away from the house and any listening ears, Tracy turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've been to the bank," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you found what Howard left for you?" "Yes." Tracy nodded slowly. "Good. Your grandfather spent a lot of time making sure everything was set up properly. He was very concerned about protecting your inheritance from outside interference. Walter's not going to give up easily. No, he's not. But he also doesn't have any legal standing to challenge what your grandfather did. The assets you inherited were never part of the probate estate. They were gifts made during Howard's lifetime, held in trust until you were ready to claim them." We reached Tracy's car, and she paused with her hand on the door handle. "There's something else you should know, Ethan. Tomorrow night, Walter is planning what he's calling a celebration dinner at the community hall. He's invited half the town, supposedly to honor your grandfather's memory, but really it's a victory lap. He thinks he's figured out how to get his hands on Howard's money, and he wants to make a public show of it." "What's he planning?" "I'm not sure, but knowing Walter, it's going to be ugly, and public, and aimed at humiliating you one more time." That night, I sat on Susan's apartment balcony, looking out over the lights of Millbrook and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Tomorrow night, Walter would make his play, whatever it was. He'd try to embarrass me in front of the whole town, just as he'd done at the will reading. But this time, I wouldn't be defenseless. This time, I had something Walter didn't know about, something that would turn his moment of triumph into the shock of his life. "Are you ready for this?" Susan asked, joining me on the balcony with 2 cups of coffee. "I think so. Martin said he could arrange for the bank documents to be available tomorrow if I need them. All I have to do is call." "And you're sure you want to do it publicly? You could just tell Walter privately, let him save face." I thought about that for a long moment. Walter had never shown me mercy when he had the upper hand. He'd humiliated me at the will reading, mocked me at the funeral, threatened me when he thought I was getting too close to the truth. He'd spent my entire life treating me like a disappointment, like someone who would never amount to anything. He made this public, I said finally. Oh, he chose to humiliate me in front of the whole family, in front of everyone at the funeral. If he wants to make tomorrow night about money and family and who deserves what, then that's exactly what we'll talk about. Susan squeezed my hand. Your grandfather would be proud of you. I hoped she was right, because tomorrow night I was going to find out if 29 years of being underestimated had prepared me for the moment when the tables finally turned. The community hall was already decorated when I drove past it Friday afternoon. Banners reading "In Memory of Howard Landry" and "Family Celebration" hung from the entrance, and I could see Walter's car in the parking lot along with several others. He was setting the stage for whatever performance he had planned. I went home, showered, and put on my best suit, the same one I'd worn to the bank earlier in the week. Then I called Martin Givens. I need those documents, I said. All of them. And I need you to be available by phone tonight in case there are questions about the legal status of the inheritance. Are you sure about this, Ethan? Once you make this public, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. It's time everyone learned what Howard Landry really thought of his grandson. As I hung up the phone, I felt a calm settling over me that I hadn't experienced in years. Tonight, the laughing would stop. Tonight, Walter would learn that sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who win in the end. Tonight, my grandfather's final lesson would be complete. The Grant County Community Hall buzzed with conversation and the clatter of dinner plates as what seemed like half of Millbrook gathered for Walter's celebration. He'd outdone himself with the event, catered food, an open bar, and enough folding chairs to seat nearly 200 people. A large photograph of Grandpa Howard sat on an easel near the front of the room, surrounded by flowers and flanked by banners celebrating his life and legacy. I arrived fashionably late, carrying a manila envelope thick with bank documents and wearing the confident expression of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. Susan had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. This was between Walter and me, between father and son, between the man who'd spent 30 years underestimating me and the grandson who'd inherited more than anyone imagined. Walter spotted me immediately, his face lighting up with the kind of predatory satisfaction that meant he was planning something spectacular. He was holding court near the bar, regaling a group of relatives and family friends with what I could only assume was the opening act of tonight's main performance. "Ethan," he called out, loud enough for half the room to hear. "There's my boy. Come over here, son. We've got some things to discuss." The conversations around us quieted as people sensed drama in the air. I recognized most of the faces. Relatives from the will reading, neighbors who'd known our family for years, business associates of Walter's, even some of my grandfather's former colleagues from his accounting firm. This was exactly the audience Walter wanted for whatever he had planned. "Dad," I said calmly, approaching the group, "nice turnout. Grandpa would have been surprised to see so many people." "Oh, I think he'd be more than surprised," Walter said, his grin widening. "I think he'd be downright shocked at what we've discovered about his little financial arrangements." Derek appeared at Walter's elbow, practically vibrating with anticipation. Uncle Ray stood nearby, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to leave. Linda hovered at the edge of the group, wringing her hands and shooting nervous glances between Walter and me. "You see, folks," Walter continued, addressing the growing crowd of onlookers, "it turns out my father was more clever than any of us gave him credit for, more clever and more devious." He pulled out a folder, the same one he'd shown at the family meeting, and waved it dramatically. Bank records, proof that the old man was moving money around, hiding assets, keeping secrets from his own family. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw Tracy Winters enter the hall, her expression carefully neutral as she took in the scene. Martin Givens was there too, I realized with surprise, standing near the back with his daughter Carolyn. "Now my son Ethan here," Walter continued, putting his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that felt more like a threat than affection. "He's been doing some detective work, haven't you, son?" Sniffing around the bank, asking questions, trying to figure out where Grandpa's money went. "That's right," I said evenly. "I have been asking questions." "And what did you find?" Walter's voice carried a note of triumph that told me he thought he already knew the answer. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for since Monday morning in the bank vault. I looked around the room, at all the faces watching expectantly, at Walter's confident smirk, at Derek's eager anticipation. "I found exactly what Grandpa wanted me to find," I said, pulling the manila envelope from under my arm. "The truth about his financial arrangements." Walter's expression flickered slightly, but he pressed on. "The truth is that he was hiding money that should have gone to his family, money that should have been part of the estate." You're absolutely right, I said, opening the envelope and pulling out the first document. He was hiding money, quite a lot of it, actually. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that we were approaching the climax of whatever drama Walter had orchestrated. I saw Tracy moving through the crowd, positioning herself where she could intervene if necessary. This, I said, holding up a bank statement, is a record of an investment account that Grandpa opened 20 years ago. Account number HB472918563. Walter squinted at the paper, trying to read the numbers from where he stood. What's the balance? As of last week, $127,000? A collective intake of breath from the crowd. Walter's eyes widened, and I saw him calculating how much of that money he thought he could claim. And this, I continued, pulling out another document, is a certificate of deposit that's been growing for 15 years. Current value, $89,000. Walter was practically salivating now. Jesus Christ, Ethan. Where's all this money? Why wasn't it in the will? Because, I said, pulling out the deed to the commercial property. It wasn't part of the probate estate. It was a gift that Grandpa spent 20 years preparing for the person he thought deserved it. Well, of course it should go to family, Walter said quickly. I'm his son, his heir. This money should be split between... It already went to family, I interrupted, pulling out Howard's letter and reading from it in a voice loud enough for everyone in the hall to hear. My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then you've proven what I always knew, that you inherited more than just my eyes and my height. You inherited my mind for numbers and my patience for puzzles. The room fell completely silent. Walter's face was cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first stirrings of rage. Your father never understood that wealth isn't just about the money you can see, I continued. It's about the money you can grow, the investments you can nurture, the future you can build with careful planning and smart decisions. That's impossible, Walter said, his voice tight. You inherited $20. Just $20. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $20 bill, holding it up so everyone could see the circled serial number. HB472918556C, the same number as the investment account, the same number as the safe deposit box where Grandpa kept all the legal documents, the same number he spent 6 months getting from the Federal Reserve Bank so that when I was ready, I'd have the key to everything he'd built for me. The silence in the room was deafening. Walter stared at the $20 bill, then at the bank documents, then back at me, his face going through a remarkable transformation from triumph to confusion to dawning horror. $400,000, I said, letting the number hang in the air, plus a commercial property downtown that generates rental income. All of it legally transferred to me over the past 20 years, all of it properly documented, all of it exactly what Grandpa intended. No, Walter said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, that's not possible. You're lying. Am I? I looked toward the back of the room, where Martin Givens was watching with professional interest. Martin, you're the bank manager who helped execute Grandpa's instructions. Would you like to confirm the details? Martin stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent his career handling exactly these kinds of financial arrangements. Everything Mr. Ethan Landry has described is accurate. Howard Landry spent considerable time and effort setting up a comprehensive inheritance plan that would transfer his assets to his chosen beneficiary while avoiding probate. The plan was executed flawlessly. Walter turned to Tracy Winters, desperation creeping into his voice. Tracy, this can't be legal. There has to be something. It's completely legal, Tracy said calmly. I helped Howard set up the initial trust structures 15 years ago. Every document was properly notarized, every transfer was documented, every legal requirement was met. The crowd was murmuring now, people turning to their neighbors to whisper about what they'd just witnessed. I saw amazement on some faces, calculation on others, and more than a few expressions of satisfaction at seeing Walter's arrogance finally punctured. But he left me nothing, Walter said, his voice breaking slightly. His own son, and he left me nothing. He left you exactly what he thought you deserved, I said, folding the documents and returning them to the envelope. A car and some furniture. The inheritance of a man who spent 40 years complaining about his father's frugality without ever understanding that every dollar saved was a dollar invested in his grandson's future. Derek stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. This is nonsense, Ethan. You can't just... I can't just what? I turned to face my brother, feeling 29 years of accumulated resentment crystallizing into perfect clarity. I can't just accept the inheritance that Grandpa spent 2 decades planning. I can't just use the key he gave me to unlock the future he built for me. I can't just prove that sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who understand what really matters. The room erupted in conversation as the full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. Walter stood frozen, staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. Linda was crying softly, though whether from shock or relief or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. I looked around the room one more time, at all the faces that had witnessed Walter's moment of triumph turn into his moment of ultimate defeat, at the relatives who'd snickered when I inherited only $20, at the neighbors who'd heard Walter's jokes about his father's cheapness, at the business associates who'd watched Walter's confident performance crumble into stunned silence. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I think Grandpa would have enjoyed seeing this. He always did appreciate a well-executed plan." I walked toward the exit, the manila envelope under my arm and the $20 bill still in my hand. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of conversation as everyone tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Walter's voice rose above the others, demanding answers, making threats, insisting that there had to be some mistake. But there was no mistake. Howard Landry had been an accountant, and nothing was accidental. He'd spent 20 years building a legacy for his grandson, and tonight that legacy had finally been claimed. As I pushed through the doors of the community hall and stepped into the cool October night, I could hear the chaos continuing behind me. Walter's laughter had finally stopped, replaced by the sound of a man discovering that respect doesn't always come in the form you expect.